I want to read to you a quote from the great Tom Verducci, the co-author along with Maddon of the Book of Joe, Trying Not to Suck at Baseball and Life, the book we're going to use as the source text today, and it perfectly encapsulates this book, which, like the man himself, is not easy to encapsulate. Verducci says, "Like Maddon, what you are reading defies convention. It's not a memoir. It's not an insider's account of how managing has changed. It's not a discourse on leadership. It's not insights into what makes a winning culture or how to manage people from rookies to superstars. It's not a collection of life lessons from someone who rode in minor league buses for 2 decades and in the biggest championship parade in American League history. It's all of that and more. Maddonism by Maddonism." I loved this book. Full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Cubs fan, I'm a baseball guy, and so by my own admission, I'm predisposed to loving it. But I think there's a lot in here for folks that don't punch either of those boxes. I think there's a lot in here for anyone who loves an original thinker, or at least someone who's attempting to be an original thinker to the extent any of us can be. As I mentioned later in this episode, to me, Maddon has the quality of that cool college professor who has this devil-may-care attitude about him, teaches in flip-flops and t-shirts, and has a cool apartment near campus, and is known for his great, relatable lectures. He holds both truths of being a classic baseball guy, yet being so much more. Personally, I love the story arc of Maddon's career and how he was actually an early data and analytics guy on his own volition. In the minors, he lugged around a huge computer and was a note cards guy and did a ton of prep work to scratch his curiosity and to pursue a data advantage, even when this wasn't the norm. But I also love how later in his career, data and analytics overreach and castration, I don't think is too strong of a word, of the instincts of managers became part of the reason that Maddon cooled on the game. I loved learning about Maddon's Pennsylvania roots. He's from Hazleton, PA, and he's proud of it. His relish of the struggle in the minors, his elite and well-earned because of that struggle baseball instincts. I mean, this man spent 20 years as a player, scout, instructor, and manager in the minors before he was even a major league manager. That's a treasure trove of information you don't just snap your fingers and gain. It was fun to metaphorically be around that in this book. I also love Maddon's ability to have both a reverence and a healthy intellectual honesty about baseball convention, and his liberal arts, as he would say, approach to it. I loved learning about his love of cars and music, the way he managed the locker room, his takes on greatness, on player relationships, and I really love the stuff in here about how he blends data with the human side of things and the scenario going on the field. I love this book so much that it evolved into a 3-part series on Maddon. In the first episode, this episode will cover his origin story, his upbringing, and his early coaching influences. I think you'll love hearing about his dad, Hazleton, Pennsylvania, his Angels mentor, Babalu, and more. We'll also cover his famous, entertaining, and instructive Maddonisms. In part 2, I dedicate almost that whole episode to perhaps my favorite coaching takeaway from him: don't mess with greatness. There are some great stories in there about how Maddon bucked the data and analytics trend with Jake Arrieta and Shohei Ohtani and did so to wild success. There'll also be a section in there on Maddon's brilliant distillation of the importance of relationships in baseball. They have always been important, but perhaps somewhat ironically, they may be even more important now in this data and analytics era. And finally, in part 3, we'll cover just that, the man versus machines debate, analytics versus instincts. Maddon and Verducci have some great takes on that. There are some great case studies, if you will, about his thought process, one of which we'll cover regarding Game 7 of the 2016 World Series pitching decisions, and also one of my all-time favorite moments in sports, the Jason Hayward-led player meeting during the rain delay of that game. That's just serendipitous and out of this world, and a really cool story. It'll all be a bit of an odyssey, but I hope you enjoy learning about Joe Maddon as much as I did. Without further ado, let's jump into this man from Hazleton, Pennsylvania. This is the Coach's Podcast. Okay, let's talk about his early life. What makes the coach the coach? And the usual disclaimer here, I like to reverse engineer these guys and learn about where they grew up, some of the people they grew up around that were instrumental in their upbringing, their parents. I think it's really important. I think it helps us learn how to recreate some of that in the kids we coach, in our families, in the people we're around, and ourselves. But if you want to jump into some of the sections from Maddon's life, some of the coaching stops that he's had that you're more familiar with, feel free to jump ahead to those chapters or parts 2 and 3 of this series. But to kick things off, I want to talk about where it all started, Hazleton, Pennsylvania. So this is almost a character in the book. It's mentioned 41 times throughout the book, so it's clearly very important and very much a part of Joe Maddon. Verducci says, Hazleton was a town built on coal and a spelling mistake. It was a coal mining town. It was a gritty coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And the Maddons got there from his grandfather immigrating in. His grandfather was Carmen Maddonisms, so obviously an Italian guy. They later Americanized the name to just Maddon, but both of Maddon's grandfathers worked in the coal mines there. And on his mother's side, his mother Beanie's side, that grandfather paid for it with his life. I don't believe it says how he passed away exactly, but one can conclude from the hazards and the absolutely disastrous effects of working at a coal mine. In the episode I did on Vivian Stringer, we talked about how her dad succumbed to the same thing. I think they said he was 27 on the outside, but his arteries and things like that were like a 90-year-old's on the inside. All the inhalation of that coal dust and the various other hazards down there. Really, really tough occupation, to state the obvious. But on Maddon's father's side, his grandfather Carmen got out alive and started C. Maddon & Sons Plumbing. He started that with 3 of the 5 sons. I believe the other 2 eventually joined as well. And one of those sons was Joe Maddon's dad, Joseph Anthony Maddon. So Joe Maddon, the coach, is Joseph John Maddon. In the book it says, along with their father, Carmen Maddon, Joseph Anthony Maddon and his 4 brothers operated C. Maddon & Sons Plumbing in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Known throughout the blue-collar town as Joe the Plumber, Maddon's father kept the pipes and furnaces in working condition there for over 60 years, always with a smile on his face and a Philly cheroot between his teeth. Philly cheroot is a cigar, by the way. Maddon's mother, Albina, known to everyone as Beanie, worked into her 80s at the Hazleton's third base luncheonette, which lived up to its name, the closest thing to home. From them, he learned the value of an honest day's work and how to meet challenges. So a couple of blue-collar parents that showed up every day, grinded it out. This is ingrained in Joe Maddon. It says, Joe's father unfailingly kept a smile on his face, even when answering an emergency phone call to fix burst pipes in the middle of a frozen Hazleton night. He says his father's job was perpetually to solve other people's problems, a life mission his son would embrace. So again, this all has a huge effect on Joe Maddon. He observed grit, work ethic, service from his parents and his family and the town of Hazleton, and he stands on the shoulders of all of that. It says in the book, Maddon grew up in the epitome of a blue-collar town. Work, family, and religion formed the pillars of life in Hazleton. It was a subdivision of Europe, Maddon recalls, for its fusion of mostly Poles, Italians, and Slovaks. It was a tight-knit, nurturing environment in which Maddon was constantly in the company of siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and neighbors. He benefited from the greatest gift a child can receive, the gift of knowing he's loved. That statement is shockingly familiar to something I read about in the Lou Holtz book and have an episode on that as well. But Lou grew up in West Virginia and East Liverpool, Ohio, and he said the same thing. He was surrounded by a lot of uncles, I think 5 uncles, lots of extended family, and Lou credits a lot of the confidence and the belief in himself to that nurturing early on and that large community that he was around and that supported him and loved up on him. And that guy, despite being 150 pounds and speaking with a lisp and not being much of a football player himself, went on to do amazing things because of that confidence and that nurturing that he received early on. Back to the Maddon book, there's a great moment in the book about how Mike Trout and Joe Maddon connect over their upbringings. So Mike Trout was from Millville, New Jersey, which sounds very familiar to Hazleton, and Maddon coached Trout starting in 2020 when Maddon started his managing gig with the Angels. And it says, Maddon found that the true genius of Trout is in what motivates the 3-time MVP from Millville, New Jersey. Even with the $524 million in guaranteed contracts, I recognize where he comes from a lot, says Maddon. He's been influenced by growing up in a small town in New Jersey with nurturing parents who he wants to please and who he respects in the same manner he did since he was 7 years old. His entire family and friends are involved in his life, and he will drop anything at any time for them. He has a strong sense of loyalty, sincerity, and authenticity. He can't help it. Millville bred it into him. He couldn't abandon it even if he tried. And then Maddon goes on to say of Trout, I feel like I've known him forever. He could have grown up on Alter Street in Hazleton. He'd be the guy who still returns to bellhops for a steak and cheese hoagie on Italian bread with a mix of the hot and mild peppers. And you can see that, right? Mike Trout just has this gritty, no frills, no nonsense, workmanlike way about him. He doesn't bring a lot of attention on himself. Throw a hard hat and a lunch pail on that guy and he looks like someone who's going up to work on the high rises in New York City or something. But he and Maddon were soulmates on this end of things, how they grew up, they recognized it in each other, and they both came from great towns, Millville, New Jersey and Hazleton, Pennsylvania, places where there were strong values and where a strong community loved up on these kids, and they went on to do amazing things. Last thing on Hazleton I want to touch on was how it came into play in a small but meaningful way when Maddon got announced as the Cubs manager. Wrigley Field was under renovation, so they had to have the press conference across the street at the Cubby Bear. I lived in Chicago for 6 years in my 20s, so let's just leave it at I've been to the Cubby Bear a few times, so I know exactly what they're talking about there. But Maddon does this press conference and answers all the questions. The lights turn off. He's still there. And what does he do? He goes and buys a shot and a beer for everyone in attendance at the bar that day. Media, people that work in the organization, and whoever else. Just like he were Joe the Plumber buying the boys around after a long day of hard work. He said, that's the Hazleton way. So again, it sounds simple, but it's one of those things to take note of, that there's nothing like having a strong, close-knit community with deep values, with a work ethic that's being modeled to produce kids that go off and do some really awesome things in their lives. Hazleton did that for a young Joe Maddon. Another key foundation for most great coaches, and was certainly the case for Maddon as well, was to have some really great coaches themselves early on. Maddon mentioned some of them in the book, Richie Rabbids and Jack Sewell, his midget football coaches, who taught him how to be tough by showing up and taking a hit, getting up without crying and not letting the group down. There was also Adam Zeminski, his high school football coach, who he said would wear a short-sleeved t-shirt in sleet and snow and who only had one tooth that was always falling out of socket as he talked. That dental work was a remnant from a massive hit he had taken while at Michigan State from Wisconsin's Alan Amici that broke the guy's single-bar face mask so hard that it smashed through his mouth and out his cheek. And Maddon says of this coach, after a loss, Zeminski would make them run as hard as marathoners. Yeah, I was afraid of him, Maddon said. But he also goes on to say self-discipline and toughness, that's what he taught me. So again, he's definitely around some tough hombres in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and that taught him to have the stamina to be great. Another important leadership model that Maddon absorbed early on was at Lafayette. So Lafayette was the small liberal arts school in Easton, Pennsylvania where Maddon went to college, and he played football and baseball there. Maddon was a great athlete as a young guy. His freshman football coach was Bob Root, who tutored Maddon on playing quarterback. Bob Root played himself at Duke, and he served in the Marines during World War II, and Maddon says of Coach Root, he taught through communication and not through intimidation. Maddon says, God, did I love him. He was the best. If anybody had the strongest impact on who I am as a coach, it's probably Coach Root. He's the gold standard because he did a wonderful job explaining things to me and breaking them down without ever yelling. He taught me how important it is to communicate. He was always there for me. So that's quite a statement to make in the book. With all the people and the coaches Maddon has been around in his long career, he says Bob Root, back at Lafayette, the freshman football coach, had the strongest impact on him. So no matter what level of coaching you're at, there's a chance to really change lives and have an impact on good young kids. And for further context on that, Maddon grew up in an era where a lot of coaches were Great Depression guys, and it's been said of them, in fact, something was said to this effect in this book, that life was hard, and so those coaches carried that over into their sport. That football must be hard and baseball must be hard. And they were usually these heavily autocratic, authoritarian type of coaches. They were not nurturing. They weren't players' coaches, as we'd say today. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of negative coaching, correcting, just trying to beat toughness into people at all costs. But it sounds like this Bob Root in college was one of the first guys Maddon encountered that maybe just had more of an emotional intelligence about him, and that was a good communicator and perhaps employed positive coaching instead of negative coaching. And that obviously really struck a chord with Maddon, and it was one of those early influences where he observed, hey, I like that. I want to be like that. I want to coach people like that and teach people like that and make them better in more of a positive fashion rather than in an intense, fear-based, occasionally shaming, negative coaching type of fashion that was more common of the coaches in that era. And so Maddon tucked that away, and it obviously served him well when he got into coaching and managing. Also at Lafayette, his baseball coach, Norm Giggin, was a guy that played 34 games for the 1967 Chicago Cubs. I Googled this guy. He looked like he was a strapping athlete back in the day, and he was the one who turned Maddon from an infielder into a catcher and told him, you might have a chance of playing pro ball, but you ain't never playing in the big leagues. And Maddon says, that's so good. I mean, I laugh now, and I probably laughed back then, but I thought it was great. I loved when coaches were straight up with me. It was just fuel to show them that they were wrong. He knew I wasn't as close to being as good as he thought he was. I loved it. So kudos to Maddon for taking that comment with perspective and making it a motivating thing, rather than taking it as a slight from Coach Giggin. Jumping ahead to Maddon's minor league days in the Angels organization, there was a guy named Bob Clear, Babaloo, who was just sort of this father figure, quiet sage, sounding board, Obi-Wan Kenobi type of guy for Maddon while he was with the Angels. In the book it says, Bob Clear was Maddon's baseball father. He was 63 years old at the time, 26 years older than Maddon. He looked like an honest, properly weathered cowboy. He spoke frankly with language saltier than that of a sailor, and he was tougher than the bottom of an old boot. But this guy helped Maddon at some really critical junctures, most notably when he was passed up for a big league coaching job, the first base job with the Angels in the early 90s. Maddon was really upset and distraught because he thought he had put in the time and the work and he deserved the promotion. But Babaloo helped Maddon see all sides of the issue when Maddon was ready to actually quit on baseball. First of all, Babaloo just listened, it said. He let Maddon vent, and then he told him with what you can imagine is this stoic, weathered cowboy delivery, you don't want that job. They'd mess with your hitters. You'd be bored. And Maddon said he was really right on that. Not overly messing with hitters or pitchers, not messing with their greatness was something that was really key to Maddon. Episode 2 will be all about that. And finally on Babaloo, Maddon says, Babaloo is the one guy who showed me the truth of one of my favorite sayings, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. A corollary to this is, I can't teach you anything, I can only make you think. These are the things I've read and studied, but Babaloo showed me. He would always tell me, I'm just trying to make you think. And that's what he was really good at. He would just try to make me think. He wouldn't tell me necessarily what to do, but he threw stuff at me all the time. Maddon was a great pursuer of intellectual honesty and critical thinking, and Bob Clear was a big influence and a catalyst and a clarifier for him in that regard. And finally, on some of these early coaching influences, Gene Mauch. Gene Mauch is mentioned 128 times in the book, kind of like Hazleton. It's another name that keeps coming up. But Gene Mauch was a guy that managed for 26 seasons in the big leagues with the Phillies, the Expos, the Twins, and the Angels. I had not heard about this guy till I read this book. Granted, he was a little before my time, but awesome individual. They called him the Little General, and he was with the Angels toward the end of his coaching career, and the guy was just a total legend. especially amongst other coaches. But Mauch went all the way back as a player as well. Interesting story, he was actually drafted by Branch Rickey himself, the well-known owner and manager of the Dodgers that brought Jackie Robinson into the game. Rickey drafted him mostly as a backup player, but Rickey also noticed that Mauch was an old soul, and he noticed this cerebral managing mind and DNA. Rickey was quoted in the book as saying about Mauch, "Look at him and you think he's 16. Talk to him and you think he's 26. Talk baseball with him and you think he's 36. Sparky Anderson had a super high esteem for Mauch as well, and in the book, The Man in the Dugout, 15 Big Leaguers Speak Their Mind, Sparky Anderson wrote, "If you had the best club, you had a chance to beat him. If he had the best club, you had no chance. If the clubs were even, he had the advantage." In 1980, Anderson said of Mauch, "There's no way to prove it, but he might be the best manager who ever lived." So again, I don't think Mauch ever received as much public fame as he did amongst the coaches and the baseball insiders, but he was clearly held in very, very high regard by his peers. And in this book, The Book of Joe, it says, "Mention charismatic leaders to Maddon, and his mind immediately goes to Gene Mauch." Maddon says, "Professionally, Gene Mauch was the one leader who stands out. This was primarily based on charisma. This guy, dang, you just feel like he's right all the time, and that he knew everything. I absolutely believed that about him. I still do," Maddon said. And then Mauch is integral in this defining moment with Maddon in October of 1984. It's in the instructional league. It's in the cages between fields 2 and 3 at Gene Autry Park. And Maddon was just coming off managing the Class A Peoria Angels and was throwing BP when he felt his presence behind him. Maddon says, "I turned and there stood one of the smartest baseball men who ever lived. The man who spent every waking moment studying angles and details to be one step ahead of the competition, if not always one run." And it goes on to say, "The tanned, perfectly proportioned face set off by the polished steel gray blue eyes and the immaculately groomed brill cream helmet of snowy white hair and the faint mixture of aqua velvet and Marlboros that atomized the air around him. The man had a presence," Maddon said. So Mauch just had this aura. It sounded like he had a real Southern California cowboy vibe going there as well. But as Maddon's pitching BP and Mauch shows up there, he delivers this moment that really gets Maddon's mind spinning. It says in the book, "Hey, come here a minute," Mauch said softly, tilting his white head for Maddon to approach him with only the netting of the cage in between them. And Maddon leaned in to listen to the wizard, and Mauch tells him, "You've created a wonderful atmosphere around here." And Maddon said, just as sort of a nervous reaction, "Thank you." And then Mauch promptly turned around in his white loafers and left. It says, poof, he disappears. And then, like I said, this really gets Maddon's mind spinning. He says, "I thought, wow, what is he talking about? I had no idea what he was talking about. I sincerely did not." Maddon says he went home that night and the subsequent nights, and he's trying to think, what is he talking about? And Maddon says, "Finally, I concluded I needed to figure it out because I wanted to be able to do it again next year, and I might need to get it intentionally done. It's not always going to happen organically all the time." Maddon ends up resolving that what Mauch was complimenting there was how he dealt with players, the relationships they had built, and the communication they had. Maddon says that at that time between he and the players, there was a lot of trust involved, and there was definitely an openness both ways, especially from the staff to the players, and that they also had fun. He says during that time they would bring in these big old column speakers every day, and they'd roll them into BP, and they'd just kill some music all over the complex, and that nobody was doing that at that time. Nobody was playing music. Everyone does that today, but this was unique then. Maddon says they'd have rock and roll one day and country the next, Latin music the day after that. It was wonderful, he said. So I think what Mauch was complimenting there was just that. It was the atmosphere. And Joe Maddon was known for doing some really unique stuff in his managing days, having pajama travel day and costume travel day and petting zoos and all this stuff to keep the team loose. I think the early seeds of that was what Gene Mauch was complimenting there. So it was one of those pivotal interactions early on from a legend that clearly made Maddon think long and hard about what Mauch was complimenting. And Maddon thought, oh, maybe this culture building, this atmosphere building is a strength of mine. And I'd have to agree, and I think others would agree, Maddon became, if not one of the best, one of the most unique player coaches and atmosphere guys of all time. So to put a ribbon on all these early influences, Hazleton, his parents, all the early coaches, and the coaching mentors in the minor leagues, Maddon sums it up by saying we are all plagiarists, every one of us. We get information that is passed on, whether it is in the classroom, people that coached us, or mentors that taught us. But when it no longer becomes plagiaristic is when you put your own identity on that thought. And that's the difference between a follower and a great leader. Great leaders take information and act upon it with true intentions. Maddon was a sponge. He was a lifelong learner that took tons of information and acted on it with his own unique spin, with intellectual honesty, which are all great traits for being a manager, especially a baseball manager, and being cerebral and being empathetic and being highly observant. And so you can clearly see how all of this is building this stew that's going to make the great major league manager that Joe Maddon becomes. Okay, so let's talk about what I love about their coaching. To the extent anyone can be, this guy is an original thinker. His whole vibe is outside the box. He has high emotional intelligence, and to me, Maddon just has that quality of that cool college professor whose class people love. He probably teaches in flip-flops and a t-shirt and has an awesome apartment near campus. And I think that's his intellectual nature. There's an authenticity in that regard that really helped create this unique and highly successful brand of management and leadership style that he has. Just look at the titles of the chapters in this book. They all capture what he and Verducci call Maddonisms, and they support this intentional, thoughtful, outside-the-box thinking. Tell me what you think, not what you've heard. Write one true sentence. Try not to suck. Let the lead bulls run. Do simple better. So he totally has this cerebral mind, not only in the vibe around him, but how he coaches and teaches baseball and just lives life in general. And I'll throw out one great example right now, quite literally from his very first days managing the Devil Rays, that bears this out. So in the chapter, Write One True Sentence, Maddon was just 15 games into his first major league season. This was with the Rays in 2006, and he decided to put a shift on David Ortiz. And you think today, oh great, so what? What's the big deal? But this was the early days of the shift. And Maddon had noticed in studying the spray charts he was given before the game how there was just absolutely nothing on the ground between third and short with Ortiz. So immediately he says he thinks 4-man infield or stack the right side of the infield. And he went on to do that in the game. And there was this huge dust up because, again, this was very new and people hadn't seen this before. And some thought he was being totally irreverent about the game. The reporters after the game peppered him with questions because they'd never seen anything like it. And his response to those reporters was awesome. He said, "Who came up with conventional wisdom in the first place? It's just something we've been doing for a long time. The game is the same game, but it's changed in other ways. And if you have enough information, you might be able to take certain chances based on that information. This is the age of information. So let's try to see if we can come up with some new thoughts every once in a while." So here he is educating the media, the press corps, anyone listening about his thought process and just showing how original he is. And you can just hear those wheels spinning, right? How he takes in all this information, not only the legacy and the conventions of the game information, but also just trying to come up with something new and creative. There's a ton of creativity with Joe Maddon, and he just shows this time and time again with the open and curious and independent mind that he has. Okay, on that front, let's talk about intellectual honesty. I think that at the core of some of these Maddonisms is a pursuit of intellectual honesty, which is so key, and it's so rare anywhere in the world, but I absolutely love Maddon's cerebral nature and his humility and his thinking that he demonstrates that allows him to pursue this. It was a real difference maker that enabled him to have some of the greatest successes of his career. There's a small moment in the book that I made a note about regarding intellectual honesty and Joe Maddon, and I think it just gives us X-ray vision into his mind, and it demonstrates how he's always trying to pressure test things, how he's always trying to listen, gather information, and think as originally and as intellectually honestly as he can about things. So the example in the book I was referencing was around the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020. So whoa, Black Lives Matter, right? A hot topic. One of those things that can elicit totally strong and polarized feelings from all sides. But the Black Lives Matter movement took place during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, and Maddon had just begun his stint as the manager of the Angels during this time. The season was delayed due to the pandemic, and they didn't end up starting till July of that year. That's usually the halfway point of the MLB season. So the whole Angels organization and the team, just like the rest of us, were sheltered in place during that time. And Maddon said they had Zoom calls to stay together, and they discussed baseball, of course, but also a variety of other topics. He said that actually some of the most discussed things were around the Black Lives Matter movement. And he was great with this. He said he wanted to have an Angel way where they were comfortably uncomfortable talking about such things. I think that's such good leadership, right? Maddon proves that he knows what it means to have 2 ears and 1 mouth in this section. He says, "The thing I find curious is how some people, if others speak contrary to their beliefs, immediately go into attack mode. That baffles me. It does. It absolutely blows me away. I so love it when people want to go the other direction from me. Wow, it's absolutely time to open the ears and shut the mouth. See if I can learn something here." So to me, that's so great because he's so right. I mean, again, the Black Lives Matter movement, people had a lot of different feelings on it. And no matter how you felt about that whole thing, what you can control is how you listen to it and how you unpack it and how you evaluate it. And Maddon's proving that he does that with intellectual honesty here. He says, "I absolutely love it when people want to go the other direction from me. It is absolutely time to open the ears and shut the mouth. See if I can learn something here." Again, you do not hear that every day from leaders. Most people are so puffed up on what they think and their takes. They're listening to respond, not understand. But Maddon shows that high EQ, that high empathy he has in that moment. And I think that's why he had great relationships with his players and why he saw things differently. It shows a lot of impulse control. It shows a phenomenal ability to listen and to be intellectually honest. And I think it was great modeling to his team, not just his baseball players, but his people, husbands, fathers, etc. Let's talk about another Maddonism I love and an aspect of Maddon's coaching that I love, and that is the process is fearless. It says in the book that Maddon and a guy named Ken Ravizza came up with this. It says, Ravizza was a guy who in the 1980s emerged as one of the leaders in what was the nascent field of sports psychology. Ravizza was a professor in the kinesiology department at Cal State Fullerton, and in 1985, Maddon met him with the Angels as Ravizza began what would become a long-time consulting gig with them. Maddon kept him on staff with the Rays and the Cubs as well. But in the book it says, under Ravizza's guidance, Maddon became an early adopter among uniformed personnel and regarding mental skills as on par with the traditional 5 physical tools on which players are scouted each spring training. He told the players if they were not working with a mental skills coach, it was no different from ignoring the hitting or the pitching coach. And this has gotten better in today's game, but again, this was sort of pioneering back then. Geez, I even remember as a kid growing up in the 90s and playing sports that this just wasn't there. And people didn't really talk about mindset or the mental side of the game or some of these soft skills or intangibles or how to slot yourself into a good place mentally. It was more like we discussed earlier regarding Great Depression era coaches. You had a lot of these loud coaches, or at least I did, almost Lombardi types that were just like, be tough and go out there and compete and suck it up type of thing. So again, Maddon's high empathy, his high emotional intelligence, recognizing the importance of caring for the mental side of the game, is displayed in an era even when that's not the norm. So this whole process is fearless thing is about staying in the moment. And Ravizza was a big believer in this, as was Maddon, as is Bob Rotella, a very prominent sports psychologist. But Maddon says in the book, when you get caught up in the future, worrying about the outcome, that's where anxiety lives. When you're stuck in the past, that's where ego lives. And it's hard to move forward. I tell myself all the time, don't miss the present. And later in the book, Maddon doubles down on this. He says, stay in the moment. It means be present, not perfect. Worry about the process, not the outcome. If you're focused only on winning, I promise you, you're going to screw up more often. And this is so true, right? It's so difficult for people to do. Not to get back to myself here, but same thing. I had so much performance anxiety. And again, there just wasn't these tools or coaching on that end of things on how to deal with this. Or if there was, I wasn't privy to it. But someone encouraging you not to worry about the outcomes or just explaining the basics of how you can arrive at something like performance anxiety because you're too focused on the outcome, you're dwelling on it. Simple things like that can be really, really useful to tell a kid or someone you're coaching. So Maddon needed Kenny Ravizza big time in 2015 in an attempt to break a 108-year-old curse with the Cubs. And this was actually where they coined the process is fearless slogan. And Maddon says that during this Cubs era, I can't emphasize this enough. The process is fearless. I mean, if you want to go out there a little wide-eyed and worry about the outcomes, you're not going to play nearly as good as you can. You're not. But if you go out there and think, I'm going to take ground balls, I'm going out there to move my feet, make throws to first base, at BP I'm going to work the whole field, don't even worry about the score of the game. That will take care of itself if you take care of these smaller components. For me as a Christian, I draw on something very similar, which I got from Scotty Scheffler, which is, our victory is secured in the Lord. Scotty Scheffler repeatedly drills this home in his press conferences that his identity is not wrapped up in golf and winning tournaments, basically in all the outcomes that other people dwell on. And just look at that guy, man. Is there a better example of someone that stays in the moment and doesn't dwell on outcomes or the past? He doesn't seem to have an ego at all, nor does he seem to get stressed out there on the golf course. He's just always kind of this chill, easygoing guy, and I believe it's from his faith. It's from the mindset that he knows and believes as a Christian that it's all done. All he has to do is be out there, present in the moment, displaying the gifts the Lord gave him, trying to praise the Lord. And man, has that guy showed that when you play without concern of outcome and you're not attached to the ego around it, it is freedom. And without even trying, you're anchored to the moment because you're anchored in something bigger, so you're not stressed about the moment. I think that's why you see so many Christian athletes giving all their credit in the post-game interviews to God, because the truth is it's a performance enhancer, because it allows you to stay in the moment. It wouldn't work if that was the sole reason you pursued it, or if your heart was just postured to try to use it to compete better. It doesn't work that way. But the truth is, when you surrender to something like that, it creates this freedom that athletes especially need, because there's so much pressure, there's so much noise, there's so many things that you can dwell on, the people in your life, agents, etc., that you'd crumple up into a little ball unless you had a higher power like that. But getting back to how Maddon defines it, this process is fearless. I love it. It forces you to seek this place where you're just being, and you're performing in a subconscious way that results in you just being who you are supposed to be. Humans, mainly adult humans in our monkey minds, we're terrible at doing this as a default. And speaking of terrible, on to our next Maddonism here, which is another one I love and one of his most famous ones, which is try not to suck. This one got a lot of press. It was all over t-shirts at Wrigley Field. The Cardinals actually banned this in their stadium for crude language, which it's working when that happens, when your rival bans it from their stadium. But the origin of try not to suck came about when Maddon was trying to help the eccentric but brilliant Javi Baez get out of a slump just after he was brought up to the bigs in 2015. Verducci has a great line on Baez in the book. He says, Watching Baez play was like watching a luge or a skeleton run, exhilarating, but always with a raw scent of danger in the air. Personally, I loved watching Baez play the game, the tags he made, the base running he had. Just a guy that played with joy and enthusiasm. Incredible instincts from the guy, a guy that was born to play the game. But the thing that Maddon tells Baez that kicks this whole try not to suck slogan off is, I want you to go out there today and play like you're in Little League. Go out like we're just a bunch of kids having a good time. Don't worry about making mistakes. Look at it this way. We're all professionals, and one of the main things you do as a professional athlete on a daily basis is try not to embarrass yourself. So how do you do that? Simply by trying not to suck. Madden, I guess, uses this inversion type of approach. It reminds me of the famous investor Charlie Munger and how when he was evaluating businesses or anything, he was big on inverting them, just trying to take the complete opposite stance and see what perspective that availed to you. Turning things on their head like that sometimes just gives you that mental breakthrough that you need. And I think that's at the heart of try not to suck. Rather than striving to be great and perfect and just clenching up and tightening and putting all that pressure on yourself, trying not to suck slots you into this more relaxed and natural mental place that you play from. Madden supports this. In the book, he says, basically, try not to suck means that you go out there and you just don't worry about stuff. You play as hard as you can. When you break it all the way down, all you're trying to do is not embarrass yourself. Try not to suck applies to managers as well. Shut out the noise and manage as hard as you can, no matter the date or the stakes. So this hack worked like a charm on Baez. He went on to hit 289 in September and started in the NLCS that year, but this statement still wasn't known to the public until 3 months after that. After the season was wrapped up, Baez was at the Rockstar Rookie Panels at the annual Cubs convention at the Sheraton Grand Hotel in Chicago, and a fan asked him what advice Madden had given him when he was called up in September. And it says, Baez gave a sheepish grin and blurted into the microphone, "Try not to suck." And the ballroom erupted with laughter. A couple other quick Maddonisms. The Maddonism I want to make sure I hit is from Chapter 10. The chapter's named Aim High, and it's about Madden's pursuit of high standards. And everyone pays lip service to this, right? They're trying to win their conference, and that they have high standards. But I feel like there's differences in genuineness, and there's differences in intention and what you truly believe within that lip service. And almost every coach I've studied has this as part of their DNA. And I'm talking about aiming higher than you even think is necessary, and maybe even more importantly, higher than you think you're actually capable of. It's easy to fall in the trap of looking at your personnel and thinking, okay, we're missing X, Y, and Z, we're a little soft here, etc. And you can be giving yourselves these little mental outs, these little mental compromises in the blink of an eye when you start doing that. I mentioned Lou Holtz's time at Ohio State earlier, and it reminds me as well, Lou Holtz was in there in 1968. Woody Hayes was coaching that team, and in 1968, they won it all, but at the beginning of the season, they were picked to finish maybe middle of the pack. They had 12 sophomores, and the media and sort of all the quote-unquote experts just thought this would be sort of a mediocre season for them. But Woody Hayes, an extreme personality amongst extreme personalities, put the blinders on, would not accept anything less than pursuing a national championship, coached his team with white-hot intensity and focus and pursuit of that, instilled it in them by force of will, and they went on to win the national championship that year. They beat a really heralded USC team with O.J. Simpson on it to win it all, and that 1968 Ohio State team is sort of a living testimony to how when you set standards high, maybe even unrealistically high, how sometimes you achieve them. And so I just want to hit that critical point here with Madden because I think it's part of the greatness of his coaching as well. He understands this. He understands that you cannot be the one to limit your own potential, and that can happen very easily. And so we go back to that introductory press conference with the Cubs, and obviously we have the benefit of hindsight of knowing that they did end up winning the World Series in 2016. But obviously they had a lot of road to hoe before that and had had the losing tradition for 108 years up to this point. But Madden says in that press conference, I'm going to be talking about the playoffs next year. I'm going to tell you that right now because I can't go to spring training and say any other thing. I'm just incapable of doing that. It's all about setting your standards or goals high because the problem, and here's the key part, the problem is if you don't set your goals and standards high enough, you might actually hit your mark, and that's not a good thing. I'm going to talk playoffs. I'm going to talk World Series this year. I promise you, and I'm going to believe it. I love that. A very, very simple concept. I think it's one that's really critical to examine in yourself as a coach or a leader to make sure you are setting those goals higher than is comfortable, higher than maybe you even believe you will achieve, and figuring out how to just delusionally believe that and coach against that and draw that straight red line to getting there. Sometimes the biggest competition isn't external, it's internal. It's you, it's me, it's the human nature that can get pessimistic, or I would argue maybe even realistic at times, but that can be self-destructive in trying to achieve greatness and trying to achieve the highest of high goals. It's something that great coaches are aware of and know how to consistently overcome. That's why you see a lot of these same guys and these same names late into the postseason and always in the mix, because they know how to manage that in themselves and in their teams. And the last Maddonism I want to cover in this section are kind of some words to live by, especially when you're chasing your dreams or pursuing any worthwhile goal in life, and that is, don't ever permit the pressure to exceed the pleasure. So Maddon says he puts this at the top of his lineup card every night to make sure you keep the moment, the joy of the game, front and center. Maddon explains it this way. I've been wanting to do this since I was 6 years old, he says. Everybody who plays in the big leagues has been wanting to do this since they were 6, 7, or 8 years of age. Don't ever forget that. Don't forget why we're here. This is baseball. This is a game, and it's entertainment. So another thing that's so easy to forget, but I bet you're a better player, coach, business professional, parent, human being, and just a more joyful person to be around when you keep something like this in mind. It's definitely not always easy to do, because when a person is pursuing a goal or in the professional ranks of sports, there's so much noise, there's so much advice, there's so much overanalyzing, and just generally headwinds and distractions externally. But probably also internally, many of us have this drill sergeant self-talk that makes us our own worst enemies, and you just grind and it tightens you up, and oftentimes prevents the best native version of you from shining through. And that's why Maddon puts this at the top of his lineup card every night, just to say, transcend all of that, especially when playing the game. It's a game, you know? And usually we play games better when we're free, we're loose, we're smiling, and just finding that joy. So I wanted to include that. I think we'd all be wise to put this at the top of our metaphoric lineup cards every day of our lives as well. I know I would. You know, life is a gift, and trying to see that each day as our baseline can bring real peace and joy to our lives, which at the end of the day is the place most people want to be. Thanks for listening to part 1 on Joe Maddon. Part 2 will be releasing next week, and it'll be almost all about my favorite Maddonism, don't mess with greatness, as well as the importance of relationships in baseball. Despite all that's going on analytically, human-to-human connections still reign supreme, and Maddon will have some great stuff for us on that front. See you then, and thanks for listening.